On Tuesday evening, just as I think South Koreans were getting ready to go to bed, there was this sudden announcement from the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol that he was declaring martial law, which came as a huge shock to everyone, essentially. This really did come out of the blue, and the whole country was thrust into a sudden panic. Despite that, lawmakers made their way in, pushing past the military police and the army in order to vote down this call for martial law, and they did so unanimously, with 190 of them voting against this decree. What I think is really interesting about what's unfolded, essentially, is that we saw a very robust democracy at work. Within minutes, people were getting in taxis, going down to the National Assembly to protest outside. We had lawmakers climbing fences, pushing past the military police to get into the chamber in order to cast their vote. And procedures were followed very, very clearly and very, very strictly. And it is really important that, of course, leaders are held to account, and the process did definitely make that possible.
The kind of the broader history of political violence in South Korea, a big part of that is basically state-imposed violence, arbitrary violence, and violation of civil rights. But it's also reflected in the resistance to that violence. It's an era of broad cultural militarism. So everyone is going into the army, right? The severity of the conflicts between unionists and riot police, that might be driven by the fact that those unionists, those labor union protesters, maybe 2 or 3 years before, they were riot police themselves because of the draft. And they know the tactics that are being imposed upon them. And that explains why those street battles are so fraught. Likewise, when you see student protesters marching in 1960, for example, you'll notice that even high school students or middle school students are marching in formation. And that's indicative of a school system that is a product of both national militaristic culture and also colonial militaristic culture. And so you get this reverberation of a culture of and a politics of violence that is being projected by the state and reflected back by the population that's absorbing it. This was a culture that many people believe they had left behind and are eager to leave behind, that was brought back right before them in a very abrupt way. The declaration and the use of the language used in that declaration, a type of the language of enemies within, the idea that there's been infiltration from the north, much of it almost retro in nature, but incredibly serious in terms of its implications, was shocking, alarming for many people.
South Korean social movements have already had experiences of organizing and coordinating this kind of mega-scale, high-stake protests and political conversations. One positive thing that I can think of is that it can actually stimulate, in a positive way, stimulate more political discussions and more popular discussions about social justices and the problem of inequality and also political economic resource distribution. But as an example, for the street protests and nationwide demonstrations that are happening at the moment in South Korea across the country, those protests and collective actions involve not just single entity. So those protests are involving general public who may not have been always politically engaged in their daily lives, and also trade unions and umbrella organizations for those trade unions nationwide, and feminist organizations and LGBTQ+ organizations are also joining in this collective action, and disability rights organizations too. So I wouldn't be surprised, at least to me, something very similar to what happened in 2017, when all these different social movements and labor movements gathered, including lawyers too, gathered to forge unified agenda.